Today I'd like to talk about a very important topic in the book of Leviticus, and that is the idea of what is clean and what is unclean. And in the Jewish society of that time, that was a very important consideration, basically to control different illnesses and also to show respect for the community and ultimately respect for our God. This topic becomes very important. So in chapter 11 of the book of Leviticus, the Lord tells Moses and Aaron which animals are clean and which animals are unclean. So any animals with hooves which can chew the cud, they would be considered clean animals. And the unclean animals would either only chew the cud or only have hooves. And that would be an example of the camel, the rock badger, the pig. And the pig was also used in sacrifice to the Babylonian god Tammuz. So the pig really several functions here, certainly considered an unclean animal, but also an animal that would remind the Israelites of another god. And they wanted to, of course, refrain from that. Worshipping any other false god was considered a taboo. So the pig really on two counts was considered unclean. And you really can't eat the flesh of the unclean animals or touch their dead bodies. It was a very strict prohibition. With water creatures, would be only those with fins and scales are considered clean, and the various birds that can't be eaten are also listed in the book of Leviticus. The following winged insects can be eaten, so it would be locusts, grasshoppers, katydids, and crickets. So certain can be eaten, certain cannot be eaten. Now what about uncleanliness? If you touch the dead bodies of the unclean animals, you yourself become unclean till the evening, and you should wash your garments. All animals that walk on their paws, like dogs and cats, for example, they are considered to be unclean as well. Creatures that swarm on the ground and that are unclean are also listed in this chapter. And if you touch an unclean animal, the problem is, of course, you yourself become unclean. So you wanted to avoid that at all costs, because you would have to go through a ritual to become clean yourself. Now, if an unclean animal would fall into a clay vessel, that vessel must be broken, must be discarded, and everything that was in that clay vessel also would become unclean. However, if an unclean animal falls into the spring or a cistern, the spring or the cistern remains clean. Cultivated grain remains clean, but not grain that has been moistened. So again, that distinction there, if it's moistened, then it would be considered unclean. The concept here is really God wants us to be holy, and we keep ourselves clean by avoiding the unclean animals. If you are unclean, you are not compatible with the holiness of God. So the whole ritual of what's clean, what's unclean, really has to be seen in that context. God is holy. God is inviting us to be holy, and to be holy is to avoid that which is unclean. Very important concept. Now, what about childbirth? There is uncleanliness at childbirth. If a boy unclean for 7 days, and there would be circumcision on the 8th day, and 33 days more to become purified. If a girl, the woman would be unclean for 14 days, and then double 66 days to become purified. And so during this time, a woman could not enter the sanctuary. And when her days are completed, she would bring a yearling lamb for a holocaust, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. But if she couldn't afford a lamb because that could be too expensive, she might not have the money to do that, she can bring 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons, which would be much more affordable. One of the interesting characteristics of the sacrifice ritual is the concern for those who can't afford a sacrifice that would be more demanding financially for them. A very amazing aspect of the ritual, concern for those who have less. So chapter 12 details all that about childbirth and uncleanliness and the rituals you have to go through. Now, chapter 13 gets us into another form of uncleanliness, and that is the uncleanliness of leprosy. Skin blotches. Skin blotches were considered to be of particular concern, and they would be examined to see if they are beneath the skin. If the blotches are not beneath the skin, and the hair is not turned white, the man is declared clean, and he washes his garments. And he has 2 periods of quarantine for 7 days each. But if it has spread again, the man shall be declared unclean. He has leprosy because it came back and spread again. Now, the man suspected of having leprosy is sent to the priest, who has detailed instructions on how to determine whether or not it is leprosy. So the priest would act in that manner as a judge as to whether it would be clean or unclean. That is determined by the whiteness of the skin and the hair. Another factor is if the infection has spread. Another consideration is the infection is found underneath the skin. So these are some considerations the priest would examine carefully and make that determination. The priest seems to perform kind of almost a medical occupation here, a medical function, similar to a doctor in a certain sense. Not really considered to be a doctor, but to judge on this in terms of what is clean and what is unclean. So he examines kind of very carefully those blotches to see what effect they have on the person. Now, the man who is found to have leprosy should keep his garments rent and should cry out, unclean, unclean, and should dwell apart outside the camp. And the reason was you wouldn't want anyone else to come in contact with this person who has leprosy or is unclean. Now, technically, it wouldn't be what we would consider today leprosy or Hansen's disease, be more diseases with regard to skin infections, what we would go to a dermatologist for to examine and to evaluate. But in the time of the laws here, it was considered to be all of these skin blotches were kind of lumped together as leprosy. If there's any clothing or material that's infected with leprosy, it should be burned. Now, how does one get purified after leprosy? Chapter 14 of the book of Leviticus takes this question up. The victim of leprosy should go to the priest for purification. Again, the priest is involved in this process. He shall get 2 live clean birds, some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. One of the birds is slayed over an earthen vessel with spring water in it. Spring water would be living water, water that is moving. The living bird, the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop are dipped in the blood of the bird that was slain. The man with leprosy is sprinkled 7 times with the blood, so that the blood is on the person as part of this purification ritual. And after the sprinkling, the live bird is set free to fly away. The man then washes his garments, shaves off all of his hair, and bathes in the water. When he is purified, he can return to the camp. He remains outside his tent, however, for 7 days. On the 7th day, he again shaves off all of his hair and bathes his body and washes his garments. And as part of this kind of purification process, sacrifices would be offered. So on the 8th day, 2 unblemished male lambs, 1 unblemished yearling ewe lamb, 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a cereal offering, and 1 log of oil would be offered. The offerings and the man are placed before the Lord at the entrance to the meeting tent. Some of the blood for the offering should be placed on the tip of the man's right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot. Oil shall also be taken from the log of oil and be used to anoint the man in the same fashion, the ear, the thumb, and the big toe of the foot. Then the priest shall offer the holocaust along with the cereal offering and the sin offering, and then the man shall be clean. So importance of waiting, taking time, and also very much the importance of the offering of the sacrifice as a sign the person is now being really purified. The person is cleansed. A new way of life, a renewal of life can begin. Now, what about those who are poor? And again, as we saw with the childbirth offering, there was consideration for those who are poor. They can offer a more modest sacrifice: one male lamb of a guilt offering, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a cereal offering, a log of oil, and 2 turtle doves or pigeons, similar to the offering of a poor woman after childbirth. Now, what about houses? There can be a contamination and uncleanliness of houses called a leprosy of houses. If there is a suspicion of leprosy in the house, the priest will examine it and see if there are greenish or reddish depressions. That would be a sign of some uncleanliness, what we would call some sort of mold. If there are, the house will be quarantined for 7 days and then examined again. The infection is still present and still persists, the house will be taken down and placed outside the camp. And the stones and mortar first would be removed also and placed outside the camp. And then if it persists, the whole house would have to be taken down. If the infection is passed, then the sacrifice of atonement will be offered by the priest with 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop, and the house will be sprinkled 7 times, so the house itself becomes purified. And anyone who sleeps or eats in the house shall wash his garments. So again, a sign of cleansing, the washing of the garments. Now, what about personal uncleanliness? We've seen the leprosy, we've seen after childbirth, we've seen that in the homes. What about personal uncleanliness in an individual? Well, if a man has a chronic flow from his private parts, he is considered to be unclean. We would consider today some sort of sexually transmitted disease. Anything or person he comes into contact with also then becomes unclean, and that person's garments must be washed. Earthenware shall be broken, and wooden articles shall be washed. When the flow is over, the man should wait 7 days for purification, and on the 8th day offer a sacrifice of 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons, giving them to the priest, one as a sin offering and the other as a holocaust, a burnt offering. When a man has an emission of seed, he bathes his whole body in water and is unclean until evening. A piece of leather or cloth with seed on it should be washed. It has come in contact with the seed, and it is also unclean till evening. If a man lies carnally with a woman and has intercourse, they shall both bathe in water and be unclean until evening. When a woman has a period, she is unclean for 7 days. If someone touches her, that person is unclean till evening. Anything she sits on is also unclean. If someone has sex with her, he shall be unclean for 7 days. Now, if a woman has a flow of blood outside her period or beyond her normal period, she shall also be unclean. And any furniture she sits on, or person she touches, or anything she has sat in, shall also be unclean till evening. And after her unclean flow, she will wait 7 days for a purification. On the 8th day, she will offer 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons to the priest. One will be a sin offering and one as a holocaust. So we can see that the Jewish people in the book of Leviticus here in chapters 11 through 15 very much concerned with the idea of cleanliness and developed these rituals to guarantee that people would follow the code and also would respect one another. This idea of community, the importance of keeping one another safe. And also must be seen, these rituals, in conjunction with the holiness of God. The rituals are to help us to be holy. And of course, who was the first one in our scriptures who was called to be holy by God? Father Abraham. And as we know, Father Abraham has many friends. Many friends has Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Keep on praising the Lord, and God bless.